Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. Today's episode is Romanticizing Addiction versus Creative Freedom. I'm your host, Mark Winkler, and our today's guest is John Lavitt. He's a well-known writer and principal content creator for Tarzana Treatment Centers. How you doing today, John?
I'm doing well, Mark. And you work for Tarzana Treatment Centers as well.
You know what? I think I do, man.
I
am a Program Operations Supervisor. You know what it is? So when I put on another hat, that hat goes and it replaces the thoughts of the other one. But yes, I'm a Program Operations Supervisor. I work primarily in the youth division and I do a lot of outreach. I'm excited about today's conversation, John. Romanticizing addiction.
Yes, and I want to talk about my own experience and what I went through. So I've been sober for 17 years. I celebrated 17 years of sobriety this past February 9th.
Congratulations, that's beautiful.
Thank you so much, my friend. But I was addicted to heroin and cocaine for many years. It destroyed my life. And a lot of that addiction, the way it began, was through romanticizing addiction. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm a poet. And I would look at all of these incredible writers and artists in our society and in the history of our society and beyond, I mean, throughout the world, there's this myth of the tortured genius.
Yes.
And the tortured genius who experiences brilliant suffering. Oh, I am so forsaken, and I am here to express my pain and my suffering for the world. So I felt I had to be that. And there were tons of you have iconic classic writers and musicians. You have William Burroughs with Naked Lunch. And Junkie. You have Dylan Thomas, the great Irish poet who literally drank himself to death. You have Dr. Hunter S. Thompson, who there have been the movies about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, celebrating his incredible addiction. You have Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. And what's incredible about Keith Richards is it was like, oh my God, man, he's so cool. Look at him. And he's a drug addict. You had Bob Marley and it was like Rastafarianism and, we can smoke marijuana as much as we want. And look, we'll be creative. So this is what I thought.
So let me ask you this before we go on with that. When you say you felt that you needed to do that, was it because of your connection to writers and creatives that did romanticize it, or did, at least in their projections in their writing, romanticize it, or did you feel that pressure from the writing community around you?
You know, it's a fascinating question because it's almost like which comes first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Yes.
And I definitely didn't feel pressure from the writing community around me, but I felt pressure from within. But I don't know which came first. I think what came first was that smoking pot and using drugs and drinking made me feel okay in my own skin. Suddenly I could deal with the trauma of my childhood, and suddenly I felt like I'd found my home. I found my place. And being a drug addict, it seemed, I mean, I never used the word drug addict, you know? It was like, dude, I like to party. You know, I burn it at both ends. I'm a 24/7 kind of guy. And even in college, I went to Brown University. I graduated with honors, but I was partying every night. So I figured I could get away with it. I thought I was different. I thought I could get away with it. What it led to me living in Los Angeles, driving downtown to the barrio every single night, and scoring heroin and crack. What was interesting is when me and my friends first started driving downtown, we would drive past Virgil Avenue, which is an avenue in Los Angeles. And when we drove past Virgil Avenue, we romanticized it. We were like, man, Virgil is Dante's guide in the Inferno.
Yes.
So we are entering the Inferno. We are entering hell. And we would score the drugs, and it was just like, we just loved the literary references. It was all fun and games. But then it changed. And what's interesting is when it changed, that's when I started writing my drug poetry. And my drug poetry, because it was good, almost gave me a justification to keep going. And I have a poem about when that drive past Virgil changed that I want to share with you. I'm not sharing the whole poem, I'm just sharing the last 2 stanzas of it.
But before you do that, I want to ask you a question.
Of course.
The language you spoke about, you said you didn't consider yourself an addict, even as you progressed down the road towards being addicted. You didn't use the language of an addict. Why was that? Was it, you said, what did you say? I'm partying.
But that was just in the beginning.
Okay.
By this time, when I wrote this poem, I
Okay.
knew I was an addict, and I was using the language of an addict.
Okay.
But what I was romanticizing at that point was not just the drug use, but the idea of being forsaken. Like, man, if I'm forsaken, I'm gonna be the most forsaken guy on this block. I'm gonna show you forsaken, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So this is a poem, the last 2 verses of the poem, which is called How Accurate. Can barely remember how it began, when bitterness rose like a vapor, expanding into a cynical answer. How quickly it filled my life, how little there was to fill. I'm not scared of these sentences. Today is not trembling with fear. Is tomorrow a burnt offering? We expose horror in routine. Through routine the smoke rises, habits rising night after night, until Virgil and the dark descent is no longer a poet's metaphor. I pass him by, taking no notice, noticing now only and forever how cold and damp my palms, and how accurate the shaking.
Wow. That's, let me ask you this. When you wrote that poem, and poems like this, you felt that you were in a very strong creative space, right? Is that accurate to say?
I totally felt I was in a strong
Okay.
creative space.
Did you have reinforcement of that? Did you publicly read this? Did you show this poem? And did you get confirmation from the community around you in any way that affirmed that, yeah, I'm in a creative space?
What's fascinating is I did read it later. When I first started, there was shame involved as well. So I read it to my drug friends. And my drug friends didn't want to hear it because it was like negative about their drug use. So it made them feel bad. But however, in 1997, I did a geographic, which means I left LA and I went to live in Paris.
Okay.
And because I thought I would, everything would change in Paris. But what I didn't realize is that even though I went to Paris, I brought myself with me.
Brought yourself, yeah. Yeah, that's normally how that works.
So I did a poetry reading at Shakespeare and Company in Paris. It was an honor that they gave me a poetry reading. And I read all the drug poetry. And I read it, and there was this crowd there, and this beautiful young French girl named Aurore Lebrun, like something out of a novel, comes up to me afterwards and says to me, "Where does all the darkness come from?" And when she said, "Where does all the darkness come from?" I was like, let me take you out to dinner and show you. You know?
Do you have a couple of hours?
It was, but it's just like, but the weird thing is like almost this whole process is once again the justification that kept me in this cycle of suffering and addiction that I thought was freeing me, but was limiting me time and time again. And it's incredible how many great people throughout history, how many incredible creators have had their creativity and their lives snuffed out by addiction. When you look at the 27 Club, the 27 Club is all these great musicians, actors, and artists who died at 27. And so many of them died because of drug addiction. There is Jimi Hendrix, who died from choking on his own vomit after taking too much barbiturates and drinking. Janis Joplin, who died of a heroin overdose. Jean-Michel Basquiat, the incredible artist who worked with Andy Warhol, who overdosed from opioids and cocaine. Kurt Cobain, who committed suicide at the age of 27, driven by his heroin addiction in the sense that he could never escape it. Amy Winehouse, only 27 years old, and she dies of alcohol poisoning.
Yeah.
And they were all, I mean, you have to admit, they were all supremely talented.
No, and here's the tragic, the fact that they died is tragic, right? But here's the even more deeply tragic part of that is that they were, at that age, they had only really began to experience the world from an adult perspective, right? And so they were still in that in-between space, probably coming out of still thinking about the world from an idealistic space, moving into a more adult creative space. What would we have gotten if 10 more years in that space? If they were sober, 10 more years in that space. See, that's the thing,
or
right?
20 more years.
Or 20 more years in that space, right? I mean, you mentioned Keith Richards. He's like, 190 years old, right? And he's still performing. Kurt Cobain, I think it was his third album that he had put out, right? And his brilliance had begun to shine more, but his suffering and his addiction only gave us a partial of his talent.
It's funny what you said about Keith Richards, because I have a magnet on my refrigerator which has a picture of Keith Richards and says, we have to start to decide what kind of world we're going to leave for Keith Richards. But what's incredible is, like, let's take Jimi Hendrix as an example. Purple Haze is such an iconic song. I mean, we all love that song. Do you know the original version of Purple Haze that Jimi Hendrix wrote had 40 to 50 verses?
I think it was 54.
54 verses, yes. It would have been like a 2.5-hour song.
Yes. It would have been like a rock opera. I think that's where his headspace was, yeah.
Yes, and that's where he wanted to go.
Yeah.
And what would he have done for us? What would he have shown us?
Sure.
It's just so incredible. And there's so many also, like, powerful exampos of people who've gone sober and who've done incredibly well. I mean, there's
before
okay.
I want to talk about that transition, right?
Okay,
because
please.
You apparently made a transition, right? But you mentioned a couple of ticks back that you were in a darkness. You were thinking, speaking to that French girl. But you talked about in that darkness, you felt there was comfort. There was this feeling of you were okay. But there had to be a moment in your life, John, where that became not true for you, right? And so as we talk about transitioning into people who went through this addictive experience and then they started to emerge on the other side, of course, your story we're going to talk about definitively. But what was that point? What happened that you got on that road towards recovery? And you stopped feeling like, I'm in a safe space in my usage, I'm in this creative space.
Mark, I wish there was one point and not multiple. I wish there were so many ugly and terrible things that happened to me in my addiction. During my last 10 years, a decade of smoking crack, I would have cocaine psychosis. So I would smoke it, and I'd have bugs crawling all over me. I'd be like, do you see the bugs? Literally. And yet I didn't stop. I was driving back from Bonnie Bray one night by myself after scoring crack. And a homeless man stumbled in front of my car and I hit him. I wasn't at fault, but he went through my windshield and it was incredibly traumatic. But I didn't stop. As late as 2002, I was driving downtown probably to score again. And thank God I didn't kill anyone. Because I crashed into a bus bench on Olympic Boulevard in my Nissan Altima. They got me out with the jaws of life. I heal well, thank God. Because this scar up here, which you can barely see, went down to my brain. I had a broken back and 4 broken ribs. They told my family I was going to be a vegetable. I was in a coma for 2.5 weeks. I was in the hospital for 2.5 months. Yet afterwards, I went back to using. When they cut down my Vicodin prescription, I went back to heroin. Because negative consequences won't get me sober. It took so much, and it took an intervention by my friends and basically being at my wit's end and finally just surrendering. And in the 12-step programs, what's incredible is, you know what the definition of surrender is in 12 steps?
What is it?
Joining the winning side. And joining the winning side was not only about joining the winning side in terms of sobriety, but joining the winning side to experience my authentic self and to experience the freedom of being truly creative in my own voice. Not a voice of fear, but a voice of faith.
That's beautiful, man. And I thank you for sharing that, John. I mean, it's, when I hear that, you know, I hear the pain that's still there in some respects, but I hear you've reconciled with it. And not only have you reconciled with it, you have come to have a relationship with it, you know, and being able to have a healthy relationship with what happened now allows you to have this conversation in a way that is healing. And I'm sure others that are listening that perhaps have been on the same journey or on that journey right now, when they hear this, it would be a sense of hope, right? Dr. Bob and Bill W., they wrote in their book, big book, it's called the Big Blue Book, right? Is that?
The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
They speak on one section about recovery should lead towards joy again, right? And that's a scary thing for people.
We are not a glum lot.
We're not a glum lot, right? But when in the rooms, you hear a lot of that, right? But I think that's because people are afraid to re-embrace the concept of joy. And in your conversation, through your transitions, I feel like you have transcended that towards being able to embrace your joy in a responsible way, but nonetheless embracing that joy. And that's, for me, that is a beautiful way to be on a road of recovery, right?
And when I can do that, particularly in this context, and perhaps help one person out there who's watching and struggling with addiction, I mean, that's why I work for Tarzana Treatment Centers. That's why I do the content for them and write for them. I mean, I could get other jobs, but the fact is Tarzana focuses their services on underserviced populations, on the people who need help more than anyone else. And the fact that I can help them reach more of those people is so meaningful to me. But then I think also of like certain celebrities who've gone to a whole nother level and who do that, like Samuel L. Jackson, who's one of both of our favorite actors.
Love Sam Jackson.
and Sam Jackson has been in recovery since 1991. And this is a quote that he said. As someone who's walked the darkest paths of addiction and emerged stronger, I know the struggle is real. But I also know that with the right mindset, tools, and support, anyone can overcome addiction and live a life filled with purpose, clarity, and joy.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And he's very open too about his addictive journey and experience. He doesn't hide it. I mean, I've seen interviews where he goes and talks about it as deeply as you talk about it. But that transformation that he's made, which has now made him one of the highest paid actors, he's found a way to be creative and sober, right? That concept of being a sober creative, right? Let's talk about that for a moment.
Well, because Sam Jackson hasn't thrown out all that experience that he had. I mean, what Sam Jackson was able to do was he was able to use that experience as a lens to make his characters more real. I mean, his bad guys are so bad, you know? his characters have such an incredible edge. And that's what I think is so profound, is like, you know, when it comes to writing poetry in my recovery, right? I just want to read you two verses.
Sure. We got a couple of minutes, so let's do that.
So two verses from a poem that I wrote. And I wrote it for this young girl who had been traumatized with the hope that she would find a way beyond her trauma. And the last two verses go, how many need a vision possible, not visionary, no light show from heaven, but a modest map of a future rendered, where each step taken leads. If she beholds a path leading, a vision of a woman possible, her shattering less than a shadow, a witness to the morning sun.
That's beautiful, John. That's beautiful.
So can we give people a path to recovery with the knowledge that creativity doesn't dry up? That it becomes something so much more profound because you find your own voice, your own authenticity. I mean, finding my voice was something that was so beautiful. It's not that my voice is not in those old poems as well, and I still value those drug poems.
Yeah.
I'm coming out with a book of poetry later this year that includes those poems.
Well, it should.
But the fact is, I can now write poetry about so much more, about the whole rainbow of life.
Yeah.
There's so many more colors.
Sure.
There's so much more wonder and fantastic. And that's what I'm so excited to talk about in the second half of the show, is how you're able to work with young people and able to show them that. Because if I had had someone at the time when I was young, you know, be able to inspire me, then maybe it would have been okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have come out the other side. Maybe I would have had said, oh my God, someone believes in me as I am. I don't need to be high all the time.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
I think we should call that book From the Darkness to Light.
Actually, the book is called Love and Drugs.
Okay. I like that one too.
Because the first half of the book is all my love poetry. The second half is all the drug poetry.
There you go. Well, John, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your candor and your willingness to share and be open. I'm sure that it's going to touch someone in a way that hopefully it will help them to understand that creativity is possible in a sober mind.
All I can say is that I feel like a miracle today. It is incredible that I'm not dead and that I still have the blessing of life and the ability to like take advantage of this rare, precious gift that is a human life.
Yeah.
It's like, thank you so much for allowing me to be sober and be here today and be a creative person.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right. And that does it for this episode, this segment of Finding Hope. What is it? Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. Once again, I'd like to thank my wonderful guest, John Lavitt, and hope you stick around for the second segment. Thank you so much.
Welcome to part 2 of this episode of Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. Today's episode is titled Romanticizing Addiction versus Creative Freedom. I am the host of this part. My name is John Lavitt, and I'm the principal content creator for Tarzana Treatment Centers, and I'm also a well-known journalist. My guest for this episode is one of the operations supervisors at Tarzana Treatment Centers, Mark Winkler.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure. We switch seats now. I feel like I'm in the hot seat, but it's a pleasure to be here. I love this topic because I think a lot of youth, and I'll speak about this a little bit more. I think a lot of youth that we work with, they have this idea, right, that there's something empowering about using drugs or substances, and when we work with them, both on a preventive or a treatment side, we first have to bust through that, right? I want to start by reading a quote from a doctor who studies addiction, Peter Levine. I love this, what he wrote. When we think about substance use among youth, it's easy to focus on the behavior, but we often overlook is the story behind it. For many young people, using substances isn't just about curiosity or rebellion. It's about coping, identity, and even status. They're not using, they're romanticizing. Whether it's music, movies, social media, or their own environment, substances are often portrayed as an escape, a rite of passage, or even a symbol of power. Today we're going to this was a lecture. We're going to explore why behind the mindset, why substances look so attractive to some youth, and how we can help them refrain from the narrative before it becomes a reality. He was talking to Dr. Bessel, who had written that book, The Body Keeps the Score. They were having a conversation, right? But they were focusing on youth.
About trauma.
Yes, and trauma, but also it was about addiction, right?
Yes.
And that. So it was a great conversation. I was like, wow, this is perfect. So there was a youth that I work with, right?
Yes.
He was 15 years old, right? And because we're in a bunch of schools, Tarzana, right? We have contracts that we go into schools and we do a lot of preventive work, but recently we've been allowed to get into schools to actually do treatment, right? I don't know why it's taken so long for schools to come to that conclusion. We've been fighting the war on drugs for over 60 years now, right? But so we're starting to get entree into schools and working with this 15-year-old.
Before you say that, can I ask you one quick question?
Sure.
So in terms of the difference between prevention and treatment, would you say, in a sense, with prevention, you're giving them the message, but with treatment, you're giving them the tools?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. Yeah, I think when we do prevention and prevention, intervention, right? Because there's different things that we try to do to interrupt the thinking that drugs or substance use or alcoholic use is a viable option for them. So interrupting that thinking, right? So there's messaging and then there's support to help them to do that. Because prevention, it's a wide scope when you talk about prevention, right? Prevention can be helping them to reframe their thinking, right? But that also occurs in treatment as well, right? But providing them options. For instance, it could be if they feel like they are, having a longing for friendships, right? And their circle that they're in, there's a lot of usage. And so eventually someone will perhaps become their environment that they're in. We give them options, right? Well, you can do this, you can do this. So it's messaging, but it's also bringing in opportunities for them to move away from that thought, right? And then, right, with the tools, when you go into treatment and the usage has already happened, this is how you can go back to living life without feeling like you have to do this or you need to do this, live life with drugs, right?
And it's also helping them form an identity. Because I know when I was first using drugs and alcohol, it became my identity. I became, in my school, I became one of the kids who partied.
Yeah.
I was known by that. And suddenly that gave me a group of friends and gave me, I remember when I first went to college, I literally used marijuana as a way to make friends. I brought really good pot with me, and I went and smoked with a bunch of different people so they would be my friends because I was so scared of not having friends.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because with this 15-year-old, he felt like, he says, when I use, and he was actually in our prevention class, but he didn't want to go into the treatment part of it. But he says, when I use, I felt like I'm the star of my show, right? My friends, right? That was the language, right?
Right.
You know, my friends, I feel like, you know, they appreciate me more, they like me more, and it feels good, right? It's that feeling of feeling good, right? Dr. Adam Leventhal studies addictive science over at USC. He says that the primary reason most people use drugs is to feel good, right? I mean, at the base of it, people don't like to feel whatever way, right? They don't like to feel bad about something. They don't like to feel like they're being ostracized from their community. Friends, they don't like to feel bored. They don't like to feel confused. And so usage allows them, even if it's momentary.
And I think that word good has so many meanings. I mean, good means being comfortable in your own skin.
Yes. Yes.
Good means
yes.
acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good means feeling you're part of a community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And good means also not being haunted by your childhood trauma.
Right. Right.
And basically being able to get away from it and for the first time feeling that's not what defines me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my pain, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. At least being driven by that. And if they have not had that intervention of therapy, that seems like something that is, it's a viable thought. It's a thought that is the right way to think. You know, I think it's a thought that unfortunately is driving more and more youth to use, right? We're seeing in Tarzana Treatment Centers that the ages of usage is going down, right? We are being called, John, to go to schools, not high schools. We're in high schools, of course, not middle schools. We're in middle schools, of course, but elementary schools.
Why do you think the age of use is going down?
I believe it's going down, John, because of kind of what you just said, right? I believe that it is based upon youth trying to find answers, right? They want answers. They want connection. Connection is a big part, right? They want to feel like they're a part of something. I think it's hard to label it just one way. I think there's a myriad of reasons why, but connection to groups, to feel like you are a part of something, to not feel bad about something, to try and see what that feels like. Research says 1 in 5 youth have now, within, I think it was 2022 to 2023, 1 in 5 youth have tried drugs.
Do you think cell phones and social media play a big role in this?
Well, I do. I do for many reasons. One, it's addictive, right? Yeah. So, yes. So from that perspective, yes. But it does bring them into a community where drugs oftentimes is glamorized, right? It's glamorized in many respects, right? Because you don't really have a strong community yet where the conversation of drug treatment has been normalized amongst teens, right? It's different with mental health treatment. Of course, now you have kids online, they're diagnosing themselves. I have this or I have this. That's not the same for drug treatment. So there's no normalization of it. So when they go online and they're scrolling through and they're looking at different influencers, and there's some that, have this lifestyle that's wonderful and they're smoking marijuana. So if you talk to most youth, and they say that the only reason I can't use drugs is that I'm not 21. especially if it's in an area where it's legal.
When it comes to Tarzana Treatment Centers, they have like an integrated model
Yes.
of treatment, a holistic model, which is so much more than a youth diagnosing himself by going to
Right.
by going to some weird website on the
Going on
internet.
TikTok and fill out this form.
And TikTok, right?
Right.
So in a sense, how do you feel like? Why do you feel that integrated model works for youth, and how do you feel it works in a sense?
It works because it covers the whole child, right? When I say the whole child, meaning that it looks at, historical issues, those ACEs, right? Those adverse child experiences. It looks at current situation, where the child goes to school, who the family. It looks at perhaps other treatment providers. And then it encompasses who the child is, not just one aspect of the child. Because if you're looking at helping a child through an addictive experience, and I know in the culture it's addiction, but I differ a little bit with that, John. I say an addictive experience because it could be a lifelong experience, or it can be a short experience, but you're still fighting against it. But they were not born using drugs, right? So I use the language addictive experience. It looks at a child having an addictive experience, and it says, okay, what could have contributed to this child having this moment and being stuck in this moment and feeling like this moment is where he or she needs to be, right?
Plus, it also includes the psychological and primary care as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, for example, with my experience, I grew up stuttering. Growing up, I was a 20% stutterer. That's 1 out of 5 words, every single sentence. I went to the same school for 15 years, Dalton in New York. I was called a survivor. I got a bad reputation in first grade. It stuck with me throughout because I stuttered.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, that was very much connected to my trauma, a physical issue, and even overcoming the stuttering. That doesn't mean the ghosts of that trauma don't stay with me.
Absolutely.
A lot of kids at the same time experience, they have abuse, they have issues of chronic pain, they have issues of asthma, of sickness.
Sure.
And what I like about Tarzana Treatment Center's approach is that it takes in the whole person and also takes in what are their challenges and let us meet you where you're at and get you to that next level. We're not going to ignore the fact that you stutter or you have asthma or you hurt your knee and now whenever you walk you feel it. We're going to find a way to make that part of your recovery in a positive sense.
Yeah, no, and that's the beautiful thing about Tarzana, and we're able to communicate these things across the board in a very fluid way, right? So there's no interruption. We don't have to treat one part of them and then send them to Kaiser to get this, or send them to another facility to get mental health treatment, right? So we treat the whole child in that sense. And you're right, in doing so, you're able to really catch those things that could make a child feel like drugs is an option. I feel this pain, or I'm having this horrible experience in school because of this ailment or because of this disability challenge that I have, right? We're able to assess and capture what we need to do in terms of our treatment process with the child. And that really does help. That makes a difference. And it makes a difference when we're able to bring the parents in. So the beautiful thing about treating youth when they have a substance use issue is that there's oftentimes you can bring in the parent into the experience, right? And so for us, it's a lot of psychoeducation activities with the parents. But what does that do? It allows us, who only have an hour, perhaps with the youth, or 2 hours, depending on what level of treatment that we give based upon our initial assessments, it allows us to really, whatever support system is around the child, to educate them, right? So they then can become the support that the child needs. And in addition to that, it allows us to be able to work with the parents to see what they need, right? Because their needs, their unmet needs, oftentimes result in things that harm the child.
And they often don't know what they need.
They often don't know what they need.
I do have a question, though, about getting back to the topic of romanticizing addiction and how young people do it. I mean, you've done prevention
Sure.
classes and events in tons of schools. Have you had other moments where basically you had profound resistance from young people, from teenagers, because you felt like they were romanticizing their addiction, or they basically felt like you were trying to make them uncool?
Well, I haven't had those experiences, right? What I have encountered is the initial resistance of, I've heard this before, right? You don't understand, right? And so there's that initial roadblock that's there. Normally, I try to approach the subject matter with, you, as you mentioned, and not using these words, but meet them where they are, to be versed in the culture, to be able to have conversations, relatable conversations. And when I do my assemblies, it's about embracing a joyful, drug-free life. So a
joyful, drug-free life.
Right.
It's a beautiful way to express it.
Thank you. And so that allows a really wide range of opportunity, because joy is not, how I define joy is not necessarily how you define joy. But when we talk in these assemblies, it's hey, look, I get it, but how can you have a joyful life that's also a safe life? And so it opens up a conversation, because it's just that curiosity that leads children sometimes to the door of drug usage.
Mark, we have a couple minutes left in the episode. And based on what you were just talking about, I wanted to kind of close it out by bringing a quote in from Queen Latifah.
Please, I love Queen Latifah.
I love Queen Latifah, and she's been sober since 2002.
Yes.
And she wrote in her memoir about the responsibility of being a sober woman. And I think this is a lot of what you're talking about in terms of connecting to kids. Queen Latifah wrote, "I don't want to be a supermodel. I want to be a role model."
I love that.
In the context of what you're saying, how does that apply?
Well, I think it's about, those who are in front of youth, I think it's about being responsible in your language, right? I think those who are creating for youth, I think it's about being responsible. I love the series. I had some issues with it, but the series that Zendaya made called Euphoria, right? Some people said maybe it glorified, but I felt like it really showed the pain of drug usage, right? And so I think when we are presenting content to youth, I think we have to be, we have to have them in the room. We have to have their voices in the room. We have to be able to connect to them on a cultural level. We can't be apart from who they are, right? That's one. And secondly, we have to give them a dosage of like what may be perceived as romantic, but then flip it on the other side. Well, why that's not really a romantic, you should not have this romantic idea, and then end off with, what are the alternatives? How can you experience life? How can you have joy without hurting yourself?
Yes, and how can you have joy without hurting yourself? And that brings us to our end.
Yes.
Mark, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I feel like you really brought in an important message in the end, which, in the sense that recovery is not boring.
Absolutely.
Recovery is awesome.
Absolutely.
Recovery is beautiful. Recovery opens new doors. Recovery opens new doors not just to creativity, but to so much possibility, so much potential. That is what I've experienced on my end. And I'm just so happy to be a sober man who's able to give back and be of service today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Pleasure.
Pleasure, my friend.
Brought to you by Tarzana Treatment Centers. You can visit our website at www.tarzanatc.org or call 1-800-996-1051.